Hi, I'm Charles with Anicap. The story begins as a man is getting absolutely destroyed while training, and he fears that he will not survive. A group of onlookers are glad to see that he has improved over the past couple of years, and they determine that the upcoming E-Rank test won't be a problem for him. A while later, entrants for the E-Rank promotion test are registered. Our protagonist Rick is one of them, and the receptionist named Alyssa is happy to see him again. It's been 2 years since they last saw each other, and it was when Rick used to be a guild clerk. She was surprised to hear that Rick became an adventurer, and he can't blame her because starting off as an adventurer at age 30 is pretty unthinkable. Normally people start off as F-rank apprentices when they are teenagers and become E-rank just 2 years after that. Alyssa wonders where he has been, so Rick explains that he was up in the mountains training with some senior adventurers. Some unruly drunk guy tries to make advances towards Alyssa, but Rick calms him down. Everyone's attention turns to them when the guy passes out, so Rick reminds everyone to drink responsibly. Alyssa gives him his exam ticket and wishes Rick luck on the E-Rank test. Rick is horrified though when his ticket has the really unlucky number of 4242. Outside, Rick tells some girl named Rionette that he finished registering, and she reminds him where her eyes are. Back inside, everyone is shocked to see an imprint of Rick's hand on the drunk guy's armor because it's made of steel. What's even more shocking is that the drunk guy is an infamous former A-rank adventurer. His name is Domo the Fiendish Knight, and he is a wanted criminal. Alyssa is then shocked when she wonders if Rick has become strong enough to easily leave an imprint in steel armor. A while later, Rick's height is measured, and the examiners are shocked to see that he's 32 years old. After that, participants have their magical energy tested by putting their hands on a crystal ball. A couple guys get D-, and one girl gets a C+. Rick's turn is next, but the light he generates from the crystal is pathetic, and he's given an F-. The others have never seen a score so low, and they hope they never end up like Rick. Rick leaves, but the examiner is shocked when the crystal ball breaks. The next exam has participants attack something to measure the force they can generate. The device can absorb insanely powerful attacks, so participants are told not to hold back. This device is a slime bag, and a look into the past shows someone teaching Rick about it. He was told that the human body is the foundation of a good fighter, regardless of what weapons or magic they have. Rick was instructed to destroy the golden slime bag with his bare hands, because once he could do that, he will have built a body that he could trust. However, this golden slime bag is known for being as strong as dragon's teeth. Rick was sure that he wouldn't be able to destroy it with his bare hands, but he was told that doing so is simple for an adventurer. His instructor revealed that he could destroy 200 at once and demonstrated a bit of his power. Rick had to work his way up by hitting the bag with 50,000 punches every single day. Back to the present, one guy impresses everyone when he attacks a bag using strengthening magic. Some little guy is up next, and he declares that the time to show his strength has finally come. This kid is the second son of the Duke, and rumors say that even though he's just 11 years old, he has magic equivalent to a C rank. This child prodigy then shocks everyone when he prepares his attack. His setup is truly a grand display, but everyone is shocked when the attack turns out to be a tiny fireball. Everyone is still impressed by the damage it does, and they call him a genius. Rick is in awe as well, because the kid used level 3 nature composed blaze magic. Another look back at Rick's training shows some little girl using an insanely powerful fire attack on him. Both attacks were blaze attacks, but they looked really different, so Rick wonders if the kid compressed his for indoor use. Soon it is Rick's turn, but the examiner doesn't expect much from him. If magic isn't trained at a young age, then the chances for growth later in life is impossible. On top of that, Rick's results from the magic test were pitiful, so the examiner recommends that Rick just give up now. Rick actually agrees with everything he said, but he can't help but think back to his training. Rick was exhausted from punching the bag one day, but he refused to give up. Rick acknowledges that he started his journey really late, but he believes that his age shouldn't matter. Because of this, Rick strikes the bag and shocks everyone when he absolutely destroys it with a single punch. Rick doesn't even know his own strength though, as he wonders if the bag was just defective. Everyone watches in terror as they wonder who he is. The kid is furious at Rick for stealing the attention, but he plans to show off during the defensive ability test. Moments later though, we see that everyone is shocked again when Rick defends against level 4 nature composed magic, something the kid couldn't even do. The examiner is surprised to hear that Rick only used level 1 magic to block the attack, so he decides to go up 1 level for the next one. He will use level 5 attack magic, so the examiner suggests that Rick use something higher than level 1 defense magic. Rick then shocks everyone yet again when he reveals that he can only use level 1 magic on offense and defense. Rick assures the examiner that he will be okay though, so the examiner takes offense as he believes that Rick is underestimating him. The examiner decides not to hold back and starts his incantation. He unleashes the level 5 attack, shocking everyone with its immense power, and even some knight worries about it from really far away. His name is Sylvester, and he rushes to the arena because he couldn't believe such a powerful attack would be used during an exam. Sylvester is then informed about Rick and how he was able to block a level 5 attack with just level 1 defense magic. He assumes it must be some kind of joke, but he is told that it isn't. It's just an impressive 32-year-old F-rank adventurer. Rick's report reveals that he was a guild receptionist for 13 years. Sylvester doesn't seem to know what a receptionist is though, and Rick's power makes him wonder if it's a title given to someone who has defeated a dragon. After the written exam, Rick expresses how confident he is that he aced it. Just then, the prodigy named Freed angrily approaches Rick. Rick barely remembers this kid, so he assumes that he's lost and offers to help him find his parents. The kid is furious though, and explains that Rick took all the attention away from him. Just then, Freed's older sister Angelica arrives and is upset that Rick made her brother cry. Freed says that the 40-year-old man ruined everything, but Rick angrily corrects him by saying that he's only in his 30s. Angelica only believes her brother though, and challenges the 40-year-old man to a duel. Rick points out that she just got her glove dirty, but Rionette explains that picking up the glove means he has accepted the duel. Moments later, the two arrive in an arena, and Angelica declares that she must punish the old man. Duels in the kingdom allow each participant to propose one condition for the duel. Angelica proposes that the loser must act as the victor's servant until the end of their life, and her brother cheers her on. Angelica is a second-class knight, and Rick is shocked to hear that this means she's the same level as a B-rank adventurer. B-rank adventurers are powerful enough to defeat monsters on their own, but Rionette still tells Rick to take it easy on her. Rick thinks she has it all wrong though, and points out that he's just an F-rank adventurer that just registered a couple days ago. Rick fears that he won't make it out of the duel alive, so Rionette tells him to just remember his training from the past 2 years. Rick begins to be inspired by the training montage that plays in his head, but he remembers how terrible it was, and it just makes him throw up. Rionette tells him to be more confident, and reminds him of the group that trained him. The group called Orichalcum Fist prides itself on being the strongest in the continent, and they consider Rick to be one of its members. Rick thanks Rionette for restoring his confidence, and steps up to Angelica. Angelica knows that Rick is an F-rank, so she promises to refrain from ending his life. She prepares for the fight, and Rick can tell that she's a swordsman type that strengthens her body and weapons. Angelica wonders if he will be able to keep up with her speed, and Rick is shocked when she flies right past him. She explains that she slowed down just a bit for Rick, and she wonders if he's not talking because of how shocked he is. The little nerd laughs at the 40-year-old and explains that people call his sister the Flash because of how fast she is. Angelica declares that she will actually attack him this time without holding back, and she uses her incredibly fast attack again. Rick goes quiet again, but we see that it's actually because of how slow he sees Angelica moving. It's even slower than when Rick walks, so he wonders why anyone would call her the Flash. Rick easily dodges her attack, but Angelica thinks he just got lucky because only a handful of first-class knights are able to properly react to her speed. She is sure that he won't be able to dodge it a second time, but Rick is once again unimpressed by how slow she is moving. He can't believe that she's a knight and wonders if she became one through nepotism. Rick considers for a moment that he might actually be really strong, but he then laughs at the thought. Rick prepares to dodge the attack again, but Angelica trips and starts barreling towards him. Rick just barely manages to dodge her out of control attack, but Rick is oblivious. He couldn't read her movements at all, and assumes that it was an incredible skill of hers. This little incident makes him remember that he's just an F-rank, and there's a huge gap in skill between him and a second-class knight. Angelica knows that she actually tripped, but decides to pretend like the attack was on purpose. She declares that she will attack again, but move even faster this time. Her next attack takes a great toll on her body though, so she can only use it 3 times. She uses the attack that's supposed to be way faster, but it's still pretty slow in Rick's eyes. The clueless Rick fears that she might use another terrifying rolling attack again if he makes the wrong move, so he dodges carefully. Angelica is shocked and wonders what she should do because she can only use the attack 2 more times. She decides to use her last 2 attacks in succession, and Rick realizes that he needs to fight back. Just then, Angelica trips again on her last attempt. Rick thinks it's another terrifying technique and fears that his attack won't land in time. Dust goes everywhere and everyone watches in shock. When the dust clears, we see that Rick's attack created a crater in the ground. Angelica is horrified as she realizes that if she didn't trip, then Rick's terrifyingly powerful attack would have landed on her. The clueless Rick thinks that she purposely dodged it though, and she wonders who this guy is. Rick explains that he's just an F-rank adventurer that used to be a guild receptionist 2 years ago. Rick isn't sure he can do much against a second-class knight, but he will do his best during their duel and use it as a learning experience. He excitedly prepares to continue their fight, but he is shocked when Angelica just surrenders. Freed is shocked as well, and Angelica says that she will let him win this time. She tries to get out of there as quickly as possible, but Rick reminds her about the duel conditions. Rick didn't actually propose anything, but he's fine with using hers. Angelica doesn't want to serve him for the rest of her life, so she asks her legs to exceed their limits just 1 more time and runs away. Rick doesn't really consider it a victory, but Rionette reminds him that it's time for the results of the preliminary test. Just then, Rick is shocked when Rionette reveals that the other members of their group will be arriving soon. The terrified Rick wonders why they are coming, so Rionette explains that they want to see how Rick is doing. Rick has a really bad feeling about it, but it's too late as we see that the others are on their way. We then learn about a hero that attempted to defeat the ultimate monster called Kaiser. Doing so would have rewarded him a treasure that can grant any wish. This hero failed to defeat the beast, but he had faith that an adventurer would one day be able to do it. Back with Rick, all participants are told that they will be receiving the results of the test soon. Mana will be sent to their exam tickets, and if it glows blue, then they pass. Participants that pass will then participate in a mock battle for the second stage of the exam. Rionette tells the worried Rick to be more confident, and her kindness makes him wish he were 10 years younger so they could date. Rionette isn't worried about the results because if he fails, then she decides that they will just triple Rick's training. Rick is sure that he won't survive more training like that, but he doesn't have to worry about that as his card glows blue. Rick is glad to have passed the exam, but his attention turns when he smells something terrible. Just then, some noble named Raster introduces himself, and he compliments Rionette's beauty. Rick tries to introduce himself to his fellow exam taker, but Raster declares that he has no business with a middle-aged man like Rick. Raster says that he dropped something, but this just turns out to be a pickup line when he says that he dropped his feelings of love deep inside Rionette's eyes. Raster would like to make her his wife, but Rick intervenes and declares that Rionette is his girlfriend. Raster mocks Rick for being an F rank at his advanced stage, but Rick points out that Raster looks like he's at least 25. Raster calls him an idiot as he reveals that he became an E rank at 14 years old. He is now an A rank and will be one of the examiners for the second stage of the exam. Raster tells Rionette to ditch the loser, but everyone is shocked when she refuses Raster's offer and says that she is dating Rick. Rionette then embarrasses Raster as she points out that his perfume is repulsive, and Rick realizes that this guy is what smells. Raster becomes enraged and tells Rick that he better hope that he isn't his examiner for the test. Rick apologizes to Rionette for saying she was his girlfriend, but she surprisingly didn't mind. She was actually happy that he got her out of that creepy situation. Raster, on the other hand, has come to hate Rick, and he vows to put him in his place. Just then, we learn that Frida and Angelica are his younger siblings, and they complain to him about some old guy bullying them. This of course makes him more upset, and he promises to never forgive the old guy that made his family cry. His siblings tell him Rick's exam number, and Raster comes up with a devious plan. The next day, Rionette reminds Rick to hold back his strength in the mock battle, but Rick has no clue why she would say that. Just then, some guy named Lynx explains that he will be in charge of Rick's test in the second stage. Rick is glad that his examiner isn't Raster, and Lynx thinks it's strange that a clerk in his 30s would decide to become an adventurer. Rick assumes that the guy is looking down on him, but Lynx is actually in awe of his determination. Lynx is a fellow middle-aged man, and Rick has inspired him. He can tell that Rick has a goal that is motivating him, and Rick can't believe that this guy knows so much. Lynx explains that it's because the two of them are very similar. Lynx became an adventurer at 25, and he is now in his 40s. It has taken him 20 years to reach B rank, but his goal is to become an A rank. Rick can tell that this guy won't give up on his dreams just like him, so he looks forward to testing with him. The two get along really well, as they even plan to get a drink after the exam, but we see that Raster is listening. After Lynx leaves, he thinks about how he can tell how much Rick has trained just from his handshake. This inspires Lynx to train harder, but he is shocked when Raster appears and says that he wants to talk. Back with Rick, Rionette can tell that he's in a really good mood, but participants in Rick's group are told that Lynx has fallen ill. Rick doesn't recognize the name when they are told that the replacement will be Raster, but he is shocked when Rionette explains that it was the perfume guy from the day before. She points out that he's probably related to the nobles he met earlier, and everyone else in the group laments having Raster be their examiner. They're all terrified of him, as he is known as the man of 1000 spells. He has a more infamous nickname as well, which is the F-rank Crusher. Raster is called this because he torments participants that have gotten his attention. Rick is terrified to hear this because he did a lot more than just get Raster's attention. Elsewhere, Raster shows his immense power as he eliminates one of his own elite guards. Rick paces as he worries because he antagonized the guy that knows 1000 spells. Rick considers himself to just be an F rank that only knows first nature magic, so he wishes he could just go home. Going home would result in his training getting tripled though, so Rick realizes that he's a dead man no matter what he does. Rick has lost all his confidence because people keep mocking him about his age, but Rionette believes that he can flip it. Instead of losing confidence, he can gain confidence when others insult him. Rick is unsure, but Rionette knows that he is strong, and she is confident that he will beat Raster and pass the exam. She has believed in Rick since the day he decided to become an adventurer, so his confidence is restored. Just then, a stranger calls him a young man, and this person can tell that Rick is struggling with something. He compliments Rick's youth and offers to do some fortune telling for him. Rick isn't so sure about it at first, but the guy offers to do the first one for free. Rick can't resist, so he goes to take a seat, but Rionette notices a magic circle on the chair. Rick disappears and the stranger reveals that he is actually freed, and he declares that he's a great actor. Rionette demands to know where he teleported Rick, but Freed refuses to say anything. The furious Rionette demonstrates her terrifying power as she slices off all of Freed's eyelashes with just the slightest movement. Rionette terrifies Freed by declaring that she will take one of his eyes next, and even lets him choose which eye he will lose. Freed is absolutely horrified and reveals that he can only teleport objects 100 meters away, so Rick should be close by. Nearby, Rick finds himself outside the venue, and he is confronted by a large group of serious-looking guys. Some butler-looking guy explains that they're the elite guards of the Darmute family, and they need Rick to sleep for a while. Rick realizes that it's the noble family that just keeps bothering him, and the guards explain that they have to make it so Rick can't participate in the exam. Rick can't believe that they're resorting to dirty tricks like stalling him, but the butler points out that they aren't stalling him, they are ganging up on him. The butler reveals that their powers are equivalent to B and A ranks, and Rick realizes that there is no way he can win. Just then, a group appears, and Rick is terrified to see that it's the senior members of his party. They wonder why Rick is outside when he should be taking the exam, and the guards are shocked to see that the big guy looks like a talking orc. The guards confront the big guy, but for some reason Rick lies and says that this group is helping him warm up before the exam. The big guy says that he will help out as well, but Rick just gets worried and pleads for the butler to have his men back off for their own good. He explains that their lives are in danger, but the butler ignores him and tells his men to eliminate everyone. One guard tries attacking the orc, but everyone is shocked when his sword shatters on the big guy's head that doesn't even move an inch. The orc commends the guy for strengthening his body, but points out that he needs to do a better job strengthening his weapons. The guy tries to punch the orc, but he's easily stopped and his hand is shattered in the process. The orc surprisingly heals him and even gives him advice on how to stay more balanced during a fight. The blonde guy in Rick's group can tell that Rick is in trouble like always and decides that he will have to resolve the issue peacefully. This guy's definition of peace is pretty messed up though, as he pulls out a giant gun and explains that it's his newest invention. This thing is a crazy weapon as it fires magic-infused crystals. The guards try to attack him, but they just end up getting a taste of the blonde guy's weapon. Rick tells him to stop, so the guy assumes that he wants to try the weapon out himself, but Rick is just worried that the guy might end their lives. Just then, one of the guards comes up with the brilliant idea to take the little girl from Rick's group hostage. He threatens to take her life, but Rick gets horrified and wonders if the guard has some kind of death wish. Even the orc tells him to let her go for his own good. The little girl wonders what the guard is doing, so Rick tries to keep her calm and tells her that he just wants to play a game. She believes him and wonders what kind of game he wants to play, but the guard foolishly decides to make his intentions clear. He hits her, so she becomes furious, and Rick can tell that they are done for. She absolutely decimates the fool, and the rest of the guards are shocked because she unleashed 7th nature level magic without an incantation. The butler now knows exactly who this little girl is, and he reveals that she is the famous vampire mage. She is the strongest mage at only 10 years old, and she is known as the demon child of ruin. Alyssa Rhett is her name, and she isn't the only famous person among the group. The blonde guy is a half-elf, half-dwarf who is more than 50 years old. He is the world's best weapons craftsman, who many think he somehow has technology from 1,000 years in the future. His name is Mizet. As for the orc, he has great intelligence and superhuman strength. He is also a master of support magic, and his name is Brodston. The guards are then stunned to hear that they're all S ranks, and members of the S rank only party known as Orichalcon Fist. The butler never thought he would live long enough to witness them with his own eyes, but now that he has decided to retire. He plans to live the rest of his life in peace, and the guards have never seen the old man so tranquil. Alyssa then has some fun destroying everyone with her one-word spells, and Rick decides that he doesn't want to have to train under these crazy people again, so he promises to do his best to pass the exam. Back at the venue, Rionette is still tormenting Freed. Freed wonders how long she plans to keep destroying stuff, so she explains that she will keep going until Rick returns. Freed confidently declares that Rick won't be coming back because his family's taking care of him, but he is shocked when Rick casually says hi to him. Rionette sends the little nerd into a wall, and Rick wonders what happened to the place. Rionette assures him that everything is fine, and she only destroyed a small part of the building. Just then, the injured Lynx appears, and he explains that Raster beat him up. Rick is horrified to hear this, because he realizes that Raster did this, so he could be in charge of his exam. Lynx told Raster that his dream was to build a school in his hometown, but Raster just mocked and tormented him. Lynx couldn't do anything against someone powerful like Raster, and now he thinks that having a dream at his age is foolish. Lynx fears that Raster will do something much worse to Rick, so he begs him to drop out of the exam. Rick refuses to though, and declares that he wants everyone to know that it's fine to start doing things at any age. Back with Raster, he's busy taking out more of his own men, and one of his guards explains that there is an intruder. Raster's glad though when he realizes that Rick has decided to come. He thought that Rick would have dropped out by now, but this is okay with him, as he promises to show Rick what real fear looks like. Raster makes a grand display of his magic, but Rick still angrily declares that he will send Rick flying. In the stands, a guy named Ado watches the E-Rank exam and explains the 4 foundational faculties to us. They are physical strength, body control, magic reserves, and magic control. Ado has the ability to visualize the scores of other people's 4 foundational faculties, and he demonstrates it on one of the participants. He checks Raster and is amazed by his A-Rank scores. His eyes feel a bit strained because it's dangerous for him to look at anyone too strong. Ado decides to check Rick's stats, but they are so great that his eyes feel like they're about to explode, and he screams in pain. Nearby, Alyssa and Rionette introduce themselves to each other. The other members of Rionette's party call her over, so she invites Alyssa to join them. Alyssa is shocked to see an orc sitting there, and Rionette declines Mizette's offer to sit next to him because she knows that he has bad intentions. Mizet offers the seat to Alyssa after he takes an interest in her, but Rionette gets Alyssa to safety. Rick finally enters the arena, and Brosnan asks Rionette how their old rookie will do. Rionette reveals that he will pass the exam, but Alyssa points out that it won't be so easy because he's going against Raster. Raster is in A rank, and he always goes overboard to embarrass all the rookies. Alyssa is shocked though when the members of Rick's party say it won't be a concern. Raster's siblings cheer him on, and Raster is impressed that Rick was able to get away from his guards. Raster declares that he's nothing like his weak guards, but Rick can tell that just by looking at him. Rick wonders why Raster became an adventurer in the first place, so Raster explains that he's a noble, so he just did it to raise his status even further. He has actually grown bored of being an adventurer and is just waiting for the perfect time to quit. Rick can tell that this guy's not a real adventurer, so he refuses to lose to someone like him. Raster starts to fight off with a level 1 attack, but he wonders if Rick is terrified after not moving at all. Rick isn't scared though, as he's just reminding himself not to let his anger control him. Rionette told him to use the first minute of his fight to calm himself and observe his opponent. Rick does that, but Raster is impatient, and Rick is stunned to see him use level 3 magic without an incantation. The insanely powerful attack hits Rick, but he remains standing strong as he's analyzing his opponent just like Rionette said. Alyssa's worried about him, but Brosnan says that an attack like that is nothing for Rick. He explains that out of the 4 foundation faculties, Magic Reserve has to be developed before a person reaches the age of 20, otherwise there is no hope for further growth. Rick became an adventurer at 30, so his Magic Reserves are extremely low. However, Brosnan had a solution, and we look into the past once again. Brosnan told Rick that the one thing he could always depend on was his body, and he decided that they would take a little stroll to the next town over. The problem was that he strapped Rick to some giant weights that weighed 100 kilograms each. Rick was horrified, but Brosnan just told him to hurry up because there was a den of carnivorous monsters in the forest. To make up for his lack of magic reserves, Rick trained exhaustively in the other 3 areas. Raster attacks Rick with level 4 magic this time, but Rick once again is unfazed. Brosnan then reveals that for physical strength, he built Rick up from scratch. Even though Mizette hates doing bothersome things, he was the one that taught Rick magic control. Mizette took this responsibility because he didn't want Rick turning into a pile of ash after an attack one day. Rick was trained in body control by Rionette, and Alyssa is shocked to learn that Rionette is not just some normal maid. Rick amazingly latched on to all the training they threw at him, and he now stands within the realm of S rank, just like the rest of them. Raster unleashes another attack, and Rionette explains that Rick has no awareness of how powerful he is. This is because no matter what kind of insane training they put Rick through, they always told him that an F rank should be able to do it easily. Just like the time Brosnan told him that an F rank can smash through a giant boulder with one strike. Raster does some trash talking as he unleashes a barrage of attacks, and Alyssa is horrified when one attack seems to crush Rick. Raster mockingly says that he went a bit overboard, but he is stunned when Rick emerges unscathed. Raster is annoyed by his resilience, and his siblings are shocked by the old man's strength. Raster powers himself up to finish the battle with his fist, but Rick just easily knocks him back. Rick now finally understands what Rionette was telling him. Raster is so obsessed with the talents he was born with, he neglected to refine and further them. Raster has vast reserves of magic, but he is sloppy with everything he does. Against an opponent like Raster, Rick is sure that he can't lose. Raster says that Rick just got lucky, and his siblings are amazed when he finally decides to use his full incantation magic. His long incantation results in a crazy big fireball attack, but everyone is shocked when Rick easily stops it with just one hand. Rick declares that the attack was too sloppy, and Mizette explains that Rick worked his magic with a high degree of accuracy to block the attack. Rick was so precise that he didn't have to use 100,000th of the energy that Raster did to create the attack. This means that someone like Rick, with barely any magic reserves, can do stuff like that as long as they have precise magic control. Raster continues to say that Rick is just getting lucky and goes in for another attack. Rick is too quick for him though, so Raster must change his body to steel to avoid getting obliterated. Raster finally admits that Rick possesses abilities above an E rank, but still says that luck is choosing Rick's side. Rick can't believe that this guy still refuses to acknowledge him, so he points out that he wasn't even using magic, he was just using body control. Raster just wants to know how Rick got so strong in just 2 years, but Rick is insulted by the question as he thinks about his torturous training. He had to run through explosions, swim through monster capture fluid until he choked on it, and he wasn't allowed out of a dragon's den until he defeated it. Alyssa's horrified to hear just some of the training he went through because normally someone wouldn't survive it. She is then shocked when Brosnan reveals that Rick didn't survive it. He lost his life multiple times, but Brosnan's heal can bring someone back to life as long as it's applied immediately after passing away. This kind of horrifying training was necessary though, because repeatedly breaking down and rebuilding someone's body is how they get stronger. Mizette was also impressed by how Rick stayed in there, no matter how crazy the training got. He looks back to his training with Rick and how he would kick Rick off a mountain so he could develop a sense of being able to see the wind. This of course led Rick to losing his life repeatedly, and Brosnan would have to revive him. Elissaret was just as guilty of this type of training, as we see that she would crush Rick under boulders. Rionette's training involved learning to cut falling trees by using their momentum, and this caused Rick to lose his life as well. Raster just assumes that Rick is lying because he refuses to believe that such terrible training even exists. And even if it did exist, he can't see anyone being motivated enough to go through it. Rick's response is simple: his dream is his motivation, and his dream is to defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser El-Sepient. Raster and Fried have a good laugh as they call Rick an idiot, and they can't believe that he is being serious. Alyssa knows that Kaiser El-Sepient is the ultimate monster that appears in the legends of the hero Yamato, and Brosnan reveals that Rick's goal is also the ultimate goal of their group, the Orichalcum Fist. Raster points out that the legends of the hero Yamato are just bedtime stories for kids, and defeating El-Sepient is the dream of a small child. Rick doesn't care what Raster thinks, as his dream has nothing to do with him anyway. Raster agrees and decides to put an end to their battle. He surprisingly uses level 7 magic to restrain Rick, but he tells Rick not to get too amazed just yet. Raster plans to show Rick what true talent looks like, and he wants to make it so Rick can never speak nonsense again. He finishes a long incantation and declares that he will show everyone the greatest magic a human can wield, level 8 nature composed magic. This is the greatest magic that Raster, the man of 1,000 spells, has in his arsenal. This is his ultimate move, and it results in Raster controlling a giant tree golem from the inside. Raster commands Rick to grovel before him, and he mocks Rick for planning to use some airshot attack. Rick declares that he will punch right through him, but Raster says he's being delusional. Rick asks Raster how many times he has practiced using the golem before, but Raster has no clue because he mastered it after only using it a couple times. Rick then shockingly reveals that he has used his airshot attack 100 million times. Raster's siblings think he's lying, and Alyssa wonders if 100 million times in 2 years is even physically possible. Of course, Brosnan reveals that it's possible, but only if space-time magic is used. Raster has heard enough, so he announces that it's time to crush Rick's dreams, just like he did to Link's. Raster launches his most powerful level 8 attack, but Rick breaks free from the restraints and shockingly stops the attack with his level 1 airshot attack. Raster mocks him as he is sure that he will crush Rick, but he is stunned when his golem begins to break apart. Rick's airshot then destroys Raster's golem. Raster refuses to believe that this could happen to a noble like him, but his golem is destroyed and he is sent flying into the stands. Rick now taunts the so-called noble elite, and he points out that his dream is still completely unharmed. Everyone is amazed to see Rick victorious because he just looks like a normal old guy. Rick's group congratulates him on his victory, and Rick finally realizes that he really has gotten a lot stronger. He can't believe that he didn't realize how strong he actually is until now, and thanks everyone for helping him. Just then they hear Raster's siblings telling Raster to get medical treatment, but he's determined to speak with Rick. Rick can already tell that Raster is wondering how an elite like him could lose to a late starter like Rick. Fried must be held back from defending his brother, but Rick just has an answer for Raster. Rick simply explains that he limits the number of techniques he uses, and he trains himself exhaustively in them. Rick gives Raster some advice on how he can do the same, but the noble is still angry. Raster promises to be Rick's examiner again for his next promotion, and declares that he will win next time. Raster's siblings leave with him, but Angelica surprisingly shows Rick some respect. The next day, the participants that passed the E-Rank exam are announced over a loudspeaker. Their numbers are announced in order, so Rick patiently waits while his friends wait nearby. Rionette's surprised to see him so calm, so Rick explains that he was just remembering something. Rick thinks about his past and how he wanted to become just like Yamato. This meant becoming an adventurer to try and defeat Kaiser El-Sepient. Unfortunately, his mother thought it would be too dangerous, and his father wanted Rick to stop believing in fairy tales. One day Rick found some hope as a doctor discovered that Rick had a marker indicating that he had an inborn skill. People who have the marker are extremely rare, but Rick was one of them. Rick was stunned to learn that he could have an incredible power like Yamato, but he was told that it wasn't something a person can manifest through training. Rick was still excited though, and he was told to just relax and wait for his skill to come out. Rick couldn't have been any happier, and he decided that once his skill manifested, he would proudly declare to his parents that he was going to be an adventurer. As the days went by, Rick's friend would ask if his skill manifested yet. It still didn't show up after a year, but Rick kept his spirits up and thought that it would reveal itself when he wasn't a kid anymore. Eventually though, he would become discouraged, and he was told that there are cases where people with the marker never manifested their skill. There are still a lot of adventurers that don't have any skills, so his friend suggested that he become an adventurer anyway. They told him how much money he could make, but money isn't why Rick wanted to become an adventurer in the first place. One day, Rick's mom was glad to hear that he was hired as a receptionist at a guild. His parents were proud of him for finding a stable job, so Rick accepted that this was his life now. Rick went about doing his new job, but he still continued testing to see if his skill had manifested. Years and years went by as Rick's parents aged, but Rick never stopped reading about the legends of Yamato. His daily life was as a receptionist, but Rick never gave up on his dream. One day, Rick explained to Alicia that monsters had been driven out of their lairs, so they had been wandering into town. Things are starting to get a bit dangerous, and some new quests would be announced soon. They were mostly low-level monsters, so he assumes that they would be D-rank quests. An adventurer named Zaid was a friend of Rick's, and he revealed that he was promoted to B rank. This marked the moment when a person could make a living just adventuring. Rick congratulated Zaid, but he couldn't help but be upset with himself. Rick had done the same job for 14 years, and he's gone nowhere. Meanwhile, Zaid had been promoted several times. Rick didn't have much to complain about because his life was pretty stable, but he couldn't help but think how far he would have gone if he had decided to become an adventurer. Just then, Rick heard screaming as a giant troll appeared in town. Rick was shocked because it was incredibly rare for a mid-level monster to be there. Rick heroically tried to protect the girl, but she just told him to get out of the way. This girl destroyed the beast, and Rick was shocked as this girl simply thanked him for trying to save her. This was when Rick first met Rionette, and she revealed that she was an adventurer. Rick assumed that she was a B rank, but she was not. Rick was then sure that she was an A rank, and he was super excited because he had never seen an adventurer fight up close. Rick was then stunned when she said she wasn't an A rank either, and she was actually an S rank. Rick was incredibly nervous because S ranks are the cream of the crop. He had a question to ask her because she is an S rank, but he hoped that she wouldn't laugh at him. Rionette explained that laughing would not be a concern because since the 9 years that had passed since she was 8 years old, she had never laughed. Rick just let it all out and revealed that he has always dreamed of defeating Kaiser Alcipiat. On top of that, he also has an innate skill that hasn't manifested yet. He explained that he was 30 years old, so he asked her if she thought there was still time for him to become an adventurer. Rionette acknowledged that Rick had courage because he tried to save her, but he was 30 years old and he never trained his magic reserves. Rick already knew about this limitation, but Rionette explained that it's not just hard to develop magic resistance after not training it when you were young, it's basically impossible. Adventurers need at least some magic reserves, so she was confident that Rick had no chance at making it as an adventurer. Rick kept a positive attitude as always, and he thanked Rionette for the reality check. He could finally stop clinging to the dream he should have given up years ago. Rionette apologized, but Rick said he needed to hear that. He talked non-stop, hoping to mask his disappointment, and jokingly asked her to have a meal with him. Rick was shocked though when she accepted his offer, and she made plans for them the next day. The next day, Alicia could tell that Rick was in a good mood, and he excitedly told her that they should work their hardest. Zaid arrived, and the happy Rick excitedly gave him his quest. Rick couldn't believe that he was having dinner with a girl like Rionette, and he realized that his life wasn't so bad after all. Just then, people began scrambling as a monster had appeared, and Rick's good mood was ruined. Rick got worried when he spotted Rionette, but he remembered that she can handle herself easily. Rick was then startled when several more monsters appeared, but Rionette told him that she would handle them. Rick knew that he would only get in the way, so he stood aside while Rionette started destroying the beasts. She tore them to pieces, and Rick was amazed to see what an S rank could do. Rionette finished up the last monster, but she became concerned when she sensed something. Rionette had a flashback to a horrible memory, and she collapsed because of the terrifying magical energy. Another beast arrived to attack them, but Zaid appeared out of nowhere to rescue them. Some other adventurers showed up, and Zaid explained that the guild put together an emergency quest. The adventurers then worked together by using their amazing abilities, and they started annihilating the monsters. Rick thought he had already given up on becoming an adventurer, but watching this group fight made Rick realize that he was still jealous of them. Rionette warned him that it's too dangerous there, but Rick said they would be fine because Zaid is a B rank. Rionette was still terrified though, and revealed that a B rank wouldn't be enough to fight the threat that is nearby. Rick was shocked, and Rionette revealed that the threat was a dragon. Rionette said that every time she feels a dragon's magic, she loses control of the magic within her body. Rick was sure that a dragon would never appear there, but he was quickly proven wrong. A gigantic dragon appeared before them, and even Zaid couldn't believe that one would appear in a human town. Everyone was taught at the Adventurers Guild that anyone lower than a B rank should never try to fight a dragon. One guy from the group panicked and tried to attack it, but it quickly became very clear that there's no way they can fight the dragon when it pushed them back with just the force of its wing. The group decided to run for their lives, but they were stopped by the dragon's barrier. They are unable to destroy the barrier, so they realized that the dragon is not planning to let them get away. Zaid gave up as he believed their lives were over, but Rick shockingly stepped forward. Zaid reminded him that he was just a receptionist and there was nothing he could do. It turned out that Rick also thought they wouldn't survive, but if he at least stood up to the dragon, then he might at least be able to spend the last moments of his life as an adventurer. However, after coming face to face with the dragon, Rick realized that they wouldn't even be able to put up a fight. Rick was terrified, but he could still feel a fire burning inside of him. He thought he had given up on becoming an adventurer, but this feeling inside of him made him realize that this was actually the way he wanted to live. Rick then bravely launched a rock at the monster, but it didn't do anything. Zaid was inspired by what Rick had done, so he told the other adventurers that they couldn't let a receptionist show them up. The newly inspired adventurers then fiercely attacked the dragon. The powerful beast used its fire breath on them, but Zaid temporarily turned everyone to iron to protect them. The blast was too powerful though, so everyone was injured, and Zaid determined that this was really the end for them. Rionette hated herself for not being able to fight the dragon, but it was too late anyway, as the dragon prepared to end them all. Everyone had given up, but they were stunned when Rick emerged from the rubble. Rick became very serious, and he vowed that he would make his dream come true no matter what. Rionette was horrified though, when she could only watch as the dragon crushed him. Just then, a voice declared that Rick had acquired a skill, and everyone was stunned when Rick lifted the dragon's foot. No one could believe their eyes, and they couldn't even recognize Rick. He didn't look like himself at all, and there was so much magic overflowing from him that it was actually visible. Rick realized that his inborn skill must have just manifested, and he wondered what took it so long. Rick gained a ton of confidence, so he told the giant lizard to give him everything it had so he could test out his new skill. The dragon launched attack after attack, but Rick blocked them all. Eventually Rick fought back, and his attack was so incredibly powerful that it blew a hole right through the dragon's barrier and the dragon. Everyone including Rick was stunned by what just happened, and Rick humbly said that that wasn't so bad, just before he collapsed. A while later, Rick woke up in immense pain, and Rionette informed him that every magic circuit in his body was destroyed. Rick had been asleep for an entire week, and he was shocked to hear that Rionette sat by his side the entire time. Rick couldn't understand why, so she revealed that she was waiting so she could invite him to join the party she belonged to, the Orichalcum Fist. Rick didn't believe her, but she explained that they share a common goal, and that is to defeat Kaiser Alcipiat. Rick was even more shocked by this part because it confirmed that Kaiser Alcipiat actually exists. Rick fought with courage alone, so Rionette was confident that he would be able to grow stronger and fight alongside her group. Rionette guaranteed that he would become an adventurer, and this was the first time anyone ever said anything like that to him. Rick broke down from the sense of relief, and he wondered if it was really okay for him to try and become an adventurer. Rionette assured him that it was okay, and Rick couldn't hold back the tears. Back to the present, Rick's number is announced, and Rionette congratulates him on officially becoming a fully qualified adventurer. Rick credits his mentors for teaching him, and he thanks his old self for never giving up on his dream. Lynx congratulates Rick on passing and reminds him about the drink they're supposed to get. Rick thinks it's a great idea, but he is shocked when Lynx expresses an interest in meeting his party and asks to visit them. Rick's face makes it clear that he is hesitant, but he agrees to let him meet them. A while later, Lynx is on his way to visit, but he thinks it's strange that Rick told him to wear his most powerful equipment. Lynx arrives at the designated location, but he doesn't believe he's at the right place because it looks like the Demon Lord's castle. After ringing the bell to the place, Rick comes to greet him. Lynx noticed that there were no monsters on his way to this place, so Rick explains that monsters don't go near there. This makes Lynx wonder why he needed to bring armor if not for monsters, so Rick explains that the armor will keep him out of a casket. Lynx is then introduced to the girls of the group. He hopes his own daughter will end up happy like Alyssarette, but he is shocked when Alyssarette uses a level 6 spell by just saying the word boom. Rick rescues Lynx from being obliterated, and he scolds Alyssarette for using magic in the castle. Lynx is stunned to hear that she just wanted to play, and Rionette explains that she will have to deduct the cost of repairs from Alyssarette's food budget. Alyssarette begs for forgiveness, so Rick decides to spend some time with her so she can calm down. Lynx is left to relax for a while, and he marvels at how huge the place is. He goes to see Mizette outside, and Mizette explains that making crazy weapons is a hobby of his. Lynx tries out his latest weapon, and Mizette instructs him to put magic into it while pulling the trigger. The powerful recoil sends Lynx flying backwards, and the shot does major damage. The recoil was a bit too much, so Mizette decides that he will have to make some changes to the weapon. Lynx is stunned by the weapon because if it were mass-produced, then it would change war forever. Lynx is beginning to see just how crazy this place is, and he meets Broston next. Being surrounded by books calms Broston, and Lynx wonders if this intellectual orc is also a member of the party. Broston says that he has read most of the books in his library, but he hasn't had much time to read recently because he has been training Rick. Broston offers to give Lynx a training lesson as well, so Lynx eagerly accepts. Broston likes the look that Lynx has in his eyes as he senses the same light he sees in Rick. A while later, Rick is shocked to hear that Lynx went with Broston into the forest. Rick is terrified because he knows how dangerous that is. We then watch as the terrified Lynx screams because he thinks his life is about to end. He goes flying off a mountain and he says goodbye to his wife and kids. Luckily, he lands safely on the food that Rionette has gathered for dinner. She notices the weights attached to Lynx and determines that this was Broston's doing. Lynx confirms this as he explains that Broston told him to run down a slope so steep it was basically a cliff. Lynx is sure that he wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for Rionette, and she explains that Broston ended Rick's life the most out of everyone that trained him. Lynx is so terrified by that statement that he pretends he didn't hear it, and Broston arrives to continue their training. Afterwards, Lynx is relieved to still be alive, and he tells Rick that Broston was only supposed to give him some light training. Rick warns Lynx that he can't believe any of them when they talk about easy training, but Broston arrives to point out that he can just bring people back to life if the training eliminates them. Rick reminds him how fragile lives are, but Alyssarette is tired of all the talking and just wants to play again. As the guys wait for dinner, Lynx wonders how close Rick has gotten to Rionette. Rick explains that their relationship isn't like that, especially because he's too old. Lynx shocks him though when he explains that he and his wife are 20 years apart in age. He gives Rick some words of encouragement as he explains that all that matters is how they feel about each other. That night, everyone enjoys the feast Rionette made and they all compliment her. Rionette goes to get some wine, so Lynx tells Rick that this is the perfect time to go and help her so they can get closer. Rick rushes off to help Rionette, and Lynx asks to learn more about Rick's inborn skill. Broston reveals that Rick's skill is the type that is activated by certain conditions. This means that Rick is not able to activate it himself. However, thanks to the training, Rick now stands within the realm of S rank, even without his skill or weapons. Rick's skill is called Reckless Soul, and if it were to activate, he would surpass everyone, even the other members of Orichalcum Fist. Broston has a question for Lynx as well, because he works at Central. He would like to know about the magic stones known as the 6 Jewels. They are the ones in the Legends of Yamato, and Rick explains that their goal is to defeat Kaiser Alcepiet. The 6 Jewels are magic stones that open the door to the place where Kaiser Alcepiet sleeps. The 6 Jewels are activated every 200 years, and they should be emitting immense amounts of magic right at this moment as they have reached that part of the cycle. Lynx always questioned if the stories were real, but hearing them talk like this makes him confident. He has no information about the stones right now, but he promises to check the confidential department to see if he can find something. Just then, Rick asks if Lynx has any other good advice. He tried to help Rionette like Lynx said, but she is great at everything and didn't need much help. The next day, a new adventurer wonders why she has to clean the guild when she has the ability to defeat monsters. She spots Broston asking to take on a certain job, but he is denied. Broston can't understand why though, because the job's danger level is only 82 and they can handle it easily. The girl adventurer thinks this group looks pretty strange, and she thinks about how she has never seen the guildmaster be so deferential with adventurers before. Rick uses his receptionist skills to see that they can take on this job as long as they have 2 A ranks in a 4-person party. Brosnan asks if they can have some help finding a 4th person, so the guildmaster agrees. He reminds the girl named Ray that she wanted to go on a quest with a higher danger level, but she is a bit hesitant to join the strange party. The guildmaster assures her that they are great adventurers, but all she sees is a talking orc, a little girl, and some old guy. Ray really wants to do a quest though, so she gladly decides to lend them her strength. On the quest, the group makes it clear that they are searching for a magic stone. Lynx told them that it should be in this area, and Ray wonders if it's worth a lot of money. The stone is quite valuable, but it's dangerous to handle without proper precautions, and it's capable of drawing monsters to it. Ray isn't worried though, because she is confident that she can handle any monster. She is only an F rank right now, but she is sure that she will be an A rank in no time. Rick reveals that he just reached E rank, and Ray realizes that he's some late starter old man just like she thought. Rionette is back home, so she hopes that the others are okay. Mizette reminds her that Brosnan is with them, so they should be fine. The little weirdo then uses his gadgets to try and get a peek at Rionette's delicates. Rionette stops him though, and destroys his machine. Back with Rick, Brosnan determines that they're getting to the lair they are looking for. Ray is terrified to see a wyvern, and shocked that they are looking for a wyvern lair. She warns Brosnan not to get too close to the beast without a plan first, but Brosnan just doesn't seem concerned. He tells the ferocious monster to move as he sends it flying across the forest, and he tells Ray that the plan is just to knock down any monsters he sees. Ray fears that his attack will just cause more wyverns to appear, but that is actually what Brosnan wants. Brosnan tells Rick to get Ray to a safe area so she doesn't turn to ash, and she is horrified to hear how much danger she is in. Rick takes her to an open field and reminds her that she's supposed to be strong. Just then, a wyvern gets tossed right next to them, and we watch as Alyssa, Red, and Brosnan make quick work of a flock of wyvern. Ray is shocked by how far they are throwing the wyvern, and she is startled when a giant red one appears before her. Even an A rank would have a hard time against one of these, so she thinks they should run. Rick agrees that they should run away, but there is something he wants to check. He refuses to back down even if the odds are against them, so Ray decides that she will have to fight by his side. Rick can see how determined she is, so he allows her to back him up. Ray begins preparing a spell to protect Rick, but she is utterly stunned when Rick absolutely destroys the beast. Rick celebrates, as this confirms that he really is strong. The next day, Ray is exhausted, and the guildmaster explains that nothing good ever happens when the Orichalcum Fist shows up. A look back to the day before shows Ray wondering what they were going to do with the wyvern corpse. Their answer was pretty surprising though, as Rick explained that Rionette was going to cook it for dinner. She can't believe that anyone would eat a wyvern, so the guildmaster explains that people say that members of the Orichalcum Fist are the strongest in the continent. He hopes that her experience with them made her realize that she shouldn't be going on dangerous missions, but actually just motivated her to train harder. Back with our group, we see that they were successful in obtaining one of the 6 jewels, called the Crimson Blossom. It has an incredible amount of magic in it, and it should help them find the other jewels. Alyssa wants to be the one to activate it, but everyone decides against that because she would just blow it up like she does to everything. Mizette is the one to do it, and a map of a large city pops up. The city is called Heractopia, and combat flourishes in that country. They are also famous for their Colosseum. We then get a glimpse of a fight taking place at this Colosseum, as the girl is announced the winner. We then learn that 400 years ago, King Alexander built the Colosseum. The king held fighting competitions, and Alexander himself fought with no weapons, but his own body. He reigned as the undefeated champion of 10,000 fights. Then people from all over the world came to either watch him or fight him. This small kingdom grew exponentially, and it is now known as the Kingdom of Heractopia. Rick and the others arrive at this kingdom and stare at a statue of Alexander, who is known as the King of Fists. Fighting for entertainment is a huge business here, so being a fighter is a popular occupation. These professional fighters are called pugilists. Brosnan wishes he could have sparred with King Alexander at least once when he was alive, but Rick fears that they would have destroyed the kingdom. Our group tries to get information on the 6 jewels, but people are terrified of the giant Brosnan. Just then, they notice some bald guy bothering a girl. Brosnan decides to ask them for some information, but the creep says he's not intimidated by orcs because he's a pugilist. Brosnan straight up tells this guy that he doesn't look very strong, so the creep challenges him to meet him in an alley. Brosnan takes the guy up on his offer and easily destroys him. The guy's name is Gold and the girl's name is Militia, and they offer to answer any questions. Rick shows them the Crimson Blossom and explains that there should be another one of these gems in this kingdom. They are amazed by the magic emitted from the stone, and our group is shocked when they say they have seen one like it before. They can't remember where though, so Rick begs them to think harder. Just then, they are interrupted by the announcement parade of the King of Fists tournament. It is a fighting tournament to determine the pugilist champion. It will take place in 2 months, and it gets over 500,000 attendees every year. A guy named Kerwin is a 5-time champion who has won the last 3 tournaments in a row. This guy is insanely popular, and everyone is shocked when they realize that the stone our group is looking for is attached to the champion belt Kerwin is wearing. Kerwin thanks his supporters for cheering him on, and he explains to a trainer that it's his job as a pugilist to create excitement for the tournament. The trainer can tell that Erwin still isn't in good health, but Erwin says that he will just be happy if he can find a worthy opponent. Just then, Rick enters the gym and explains that they are adventurers looking for a certain gem. Brosnan wants to get right to the point, and Erwin is shocked by his appearance. Rick says that they need to follow proper procedure when speaking to a stranger, but Brosnan says that he isn't the type. Brosnan tells Erwin to give him the belt, and Rick has to clear things up by explaining that they aren't thieves. Brosnan explains that the gem on the belt used to belong to their party. He says that they will return the belt and give him an equivalent gem in exchange. The trainer plans to throw them out, but Erwin stops him. He explains that he has a good nose and he can tell that they aren't lying. While Erwin does believe them, he cannot allow them to take the belt. The belt is the pride of the people of Heractopia, and the only way for them to get the belt is by standing at the top of the King of Fists tournament. Brosnan surprisingly agrees with him, and our group leaves. The trainer wonders why Erwin just let them leave, because he wanted to let their rookie fighters beat them up. Erwin explains that everyone would have lost their lives if they tried to fight Rick and his group. The trainer is shocked because he had no clue that they were that strong. Erwin could tell that while the maid seemed very calm, she has incredible skills. Rick was also unremarkable looking, but Erwin could sense that he has trained his body to an extraordinary degree. Rick doesn't emit the aura of a powerhouse though, so Erwin considers his total strength to be unknown. As for the orc, Erwin is excited because he's the real deal. Nearby, Brosnan explains that the new plan is to become pugilists so they can win the King of Fists tournament. To enter the tournament, they will first have to pass some preliminaries on either the east or west side of the kingdom, and then win against those who qualified. Brosnan decides to enter through the Eastern League, and he instructs Rick to enter through the West. Rick wonders if Brosnan will be okay on his own, so Brosnan explains that he has already arranged to have a guide. This guide turns out to be Gold. Afterwards, Rionette explains that Rick must pass a test to become a pugilist before anything. Tons of people from around the world take this test in the hope of obtaining glory, and Rick says that it sounds like fun. The first test is a physical mock battle, and opponents are selected at random. Rick's opponent is a promising newbie who has won each of their bouts in the tournament preliminaries. Winning or losing isn't important though, because participants can still pass as long as they meet a certain standard. Just then, Rick is shocked to recognize the voice of his opponent, and it turns out to be Angelica. Angelica makes her grand entrance, but she is horrified to see Rick. The small audience cheers her on, and they predict that she will quickly destroy Rick. Rick fears that Raster is there as well, but Angelica explains that she came alone. Angelica thinks about how bad things are for her since her opponent is the old guy that beat her A-rank brother. Even though winning doesn't matter right now, Angelica refuses to suffer defeat in a mock battle. Rick still doesn't look very strong to her, but she doesn't plan to let her guard down like last time. The test begins, and Angelica vows to go all out right from the start this time. She says the name of her powerful attack, but she instantly falls to the ground. Angelica thinks she just lost her balance, but she falls again. Rick stands over her and wonders what she thinks about this new skill he has learned in the last few months. Angelica is shocked to hear that he has been knocking her down, and he explains that this skill is called the 8 secrets of going easy. Secret number 1 is continually sweeping the legs of his opponent to demoralize them. Angelica is horrified because this means that Rick has been sweeping her legs so fast that even a knight second class can't see it. She doesn't believe that such a skill could possibly exist, but it's entirely possible when it comes to Rick. Angelica creates some distance between them, but Rick once again just knocks her down. Rick keeps doing it, but Angelica says that this isn't nearly enough to make her give up. Rick then decides to fight seriously, so Angelica's bluff is called and she surrenders. Rick is a pugilist now, so he heads to the preliminaries. However, just then, Angelica stops him to wonder how many times he plans to humiliate her. Rick doesn't want her to cry, so he offers to take her to get something to eat. Militia's parents own the restaurant, so she tells him to just relax and enjoy some freebies. Angelica's shocked to hear that Rick plans to win the King of Fists tournament because it sounds like a crazy dream. Angelica became a pugilist 4 months ago, and she plans to enter the tournament as well. Angelica thought that Rick was going to try to win the tournament next year, so she is shocked that he wants to win this year's tournament. She concedes that Rick's power strains the bounds of logic, but she is sure that it won't be possible for him to win. Angelica explains that the path to the King of Fists tournament is a long one. First of all, only those who win 40 bouts over the half year of preliminaries earn the right to participate in the league competition. Rick thinks that all he has to do is win a bunch, but it's not that simple. The fights are extremely brutal, so at most, people fight 10 bouts per month. There is only 1 week left, and winning 40 bouts in just 1 week is physically impossible. Rick is shocked to hear this because he thought that 10 fights a day would be easy, so he requested to have 40 bouts in 4 days. Angelica is horrified, and she wishes he would stop breaking the laws of common sense. The next day, Rick goes to have his first preliminary bout. Rick's opponent is someone named Albert, but he is told that there are rumors about Albert breaking the rules by using a weapon. No evidence was found during body checks though, so Rick is just told to be careful. Rick faces off against this guy and is glad to see that he doesn't have a weapon. However, we see that Albert has a hidden stone that increases the force of his attacks by 30 times. The fight begins and Albert uses his coat to obstruct Rick's vision. His attack is powerful and Albert declares his victory. It's too soon though, as the pain from his broken arm eventually kicks in. Rick sees the impact stone and points out that it will break its user's bones if they haven't trained hard enough. Albert thinks about how he did train, but it's too late as Rick declares that it's his turn to attack. Rick uses secret number 2 from his 8 secrets of going easy, which is a skill that uses the shockwave from a passing punch to shake his opponent's brain and cause unconsciousness. The point of his 8 secrets is to win fights without causing major injury to his opponents, and everyone is shocked to witness it. Albert is out cold, so Rick is announced the winner. One guy is glad to see someone so powerful, and he determines that this year's tournament will be one for the ages. Elsewhere, we get a look at some fearsome monster looking guy, and he is told that it's nearly time to get to work. Later, Angelica participates in her own bout, and she absolutely destroys her opponent. Rick congratulates her on making it through the preliminaries, and she brags about winning 40 matches in a row. She also intends on winning her way through the Block League, and Rick is eager to do his best too. Angelica still can't believe that he's going to try and do 40 bouts in 4 days because each venue only hosts 1 bout per day. This means that Rick will have to travel a long distance between preliminary fights, but Angelica doesn't think it's possible. Rick has to get to the Green Hill Arena in 10 minutes before his next bout, but Angelica gets annoyed because he wasn't listening. This arena is 30 kilometers away, and he won't be able to get there in time, even if he rode on a carriage. Rick calls her crazy for even suggesting that he ride on a slow carriage because he'd rather just run. Angelica says that that makes even less sense, but Rick shows that he's much faster than a carriage. Angelica would like to watch Rick's match, but there is no possible way she could make it in time. Rionette says she can make it happen, so she does some ultra high speed parkour. At the venue, we see that Rick already finished his bout, but Angelica was in no shape to watch. Rick won, but he still needs to work on his 8 secrets of going easy because he did too much damage. Rick heads to the next venue, so Angelica tries to avoid being dragged away again, but Rionette takes her away anyway. The 3 of them then go from arena to arena as Rick destroys several opponents. The 4 days pass, and Angelica is stunned because Rick actually managed to win the 40 matches he needed for the preliminaries. Next is the Block League matches, and Angelica is relieved that she's not in the same block as Rick. Angelica was hoping to win the entire tournament, but she realizes now that it will be impossible with Rick around. To make things worse, Rionette explains that the S-rank Boston is participating as well. Angelica thinks about how no matter how things seem, she still can't let a certain man get away with something. Rionette wonders what she's talking about, but Angelica just changes the subject. She wonders where Rick is, so Rionette explains that he's out on his daily 600-kilometer run. Angelica isn't even surprised anymore by the crazy stuff Rick does, and she wonders how Rionette puts up with him. She's always with Rick, so Angelica pities her for people probably thinking that they are in love. Surprisingly, Rionette doesn't mind as she reveals that she has a deep affection for Rick. Some guy approaches them, so Angelica thinks he's trying to hit on them. Embarrassingly for her, the guy just needs their help with some work because he doesn't have enough staff. Rick finishes his run, and he is met by the chairman of the Western League's management committee. His name is Snape, and he's impressed by Rick for being the fastest qualifier in the preliminary league's history. The Lizard Man is told that Angelica isn't there, and Rick is surprised that he knows her. Snape is then the one to be surprised when Rick can tell that he's a retired pugilist, and Rick explains that he knew Snape was a fighter from their handshake. Snape reveals that he last fought 20 years ago when he won a little competition. The roar of the crowd was invigorating, but he retired when he was just 23 years old. That competition ended up being the first and last time he won anything. Snape doesn't compete anymore, but his company has entered someone in this year's competition. As Snape leaves, he tells Rick to say hello to Angelica for him, but he also wants him to warn her not to get too excited. Afterwards, Malicia seems worried, and she reveals that Snape is from the Dragonaut Company. Snape makes himself appear like a gentleman, but there are rumors that he's connected to the underworld. He's the lead sponsor of this year's competition, and sponsors are given one slot for a competitor in the tournament. Just then, Rick overhears some guys talking about this year's rabbits. They fawn over a newcomer, and they call her a dark elf girl. The next day, we see the rabbits they are talking about, as Angelica and Rionette have agreed to help the guy from earlier. The job of these bunnies is to build excitement for the tournament and to take bets. Rionette only agreed to do it because Angelica did, and Angelica says that she couldn't turn down someone asking for help with blood on their face. Some drunk guy makes all the rabbits uncomfortable, but he pays the price for getting too handsy with Angelica. Angelica gets really embarrassed when Rick arrives, and she explains that she's helping someone. Rick is in awe of how great Rionette looks, and Angelica becomes furious because he didn't react the same way to her. Elsewhere, the old gym leader reads about how Boston was amazingly able to pass the preliminaries in just 2 days. What's even more incredible is that every one of his matches was decided by a single knockout blow. His accomplishment is getting all the attention, but Erwin also points out that Rick was able to make it through the Western League in just 4 days. Erwin isn't scared at all though, and is just excited for this year's tournament. A look back shows when the gym owner first met Erwin. The owner was stunned to see that Erwin had just finished destroying a group of guys, and he called him by his nickname, which was the Ravenous Wolf of the Slums. Erwin asked the old man to clean up his mess, but the old guy refused. He explained that he was there to scout Erwin and bring him back to Heractopia. In Heractopia, he would be able to obtain whatever he wanted by fighting and winning. That didn't seem very interesting to Erwin, so the owner explained that there are a lot of strong fighters there. This sounded like much more fun to him, so Erwin agreed to go. Erwin has that same expression on his face now, and he explains that he hasn't been this excited in some time. Back with Rick, Angelica's still upset that Rick didn't look at her a certain way. Rick changes the subject and reveals that Snape was looking for her. Angelica's clearly surprised, but she denies knowing anyone by that name. The next day, the Block League competition to decide the tournament participants begins. Only one entrant from each block can participate in the final tournament, so it will be really intense. Angelica faces off against some chick named Helen, but Rick can tell that Angelica doesn't seem like her usual self. Angelica is really tense, but she still manages to win. Rick is up next, and he uses one of his 8 secrets of going easy to defeat his opponent. Rionette is pleased to see that Rick is getting better at holding back, but Angelica thinks he's just as ridiculous as ever. The two then take turns winning fights until there are only 4 bouts left. Rick wants to discuss tactics because they have to win every fight, but Angelica says that she doesn't need it. She faces off against her next opponent, and Rick is impressed to see her combining her physical techniques with magic. However, Rick can tell that there is something dangerous about her opponent. This guy breaks through her magic, and he manages to land a devastating punch. Rick is concerned as she takes some serious damage, and it is announced that Angelica has been defeated. She fought hard to press her opponent, but the guy named Taylor destroyed her with a single blow. Angelica gets healed, but her pride is still injured. Rick says that she was impatient and stubborn while fighting, but this just gets her more upset. Rick keeps trying to tell her that she could have won if she was more focused, so he wonders if something is bothering her. Rick isn't even sure if he will be able to do anything, but he wants to try and help her. His kind words get Angelica to give in, and she reveals that Snape is her fiancé. She explains that a year ago, her parents passed away in an accident. Her and her siblings took on the responsibilities of the household, but they were inexperienced and fell into great financial difficulties. Their evil grandfather stepped in and made a deal with Snape. Snape promised to provide them with a large sum of money, but he demanded that he be allowed to marry Angelica. Rick has a seriously delayed reaction to the news, and Angelica becomes furious by his lack of ability to process information. She goes on to explain that while trying to stop their marriage, she discovered that Snape had become the main sponsor for the tournament. She prepares to reveal what Snape's true intentions are, but they are interrupted by some commotion. They find that some dragon guy that Angelica is horrified of is causing a stir, and he's being confronted by the guy that easily defeated Angelica earlier. Taylor tries to stop the dragon man from hurting a woman, but the dragon tells him that he's getting too cocky. Angelica is then shocked when the beast knocks Taylor out with just one blow. A waitress tries to calm the monster down, but he just ends up bothering her as well. Angelica jumps in to stop him, but this just infuriates the guy. He attacks Angelica, but Rick shocks everyone by stepping in and telling the guy to calm down. Just then, Snape arrives and stops a dragon named Geeth. He tells him to save it for the tournament, so Geeth leaves. Snape apologizes to the bar owner and explains that Geeth is his brother. There is no one strong enough to beat him, so he is troublesome to deal with when he gets violent. Snape checks on Angelica, and he's glad to hear that she is not hurt. Snape leaves, so Angelica explains the connection between herself, Snape, and the tournament. Snape promised to give her family a very large amount of money, but her investigation found that Snape's company doesn't have nearly enough to pay. This made her realize that Snape intends to earn the money through the tournament. Rick uses his brain to determine that Snape is going to use the sponsor slot to fix the outcome of the tournament, and Angelica confirms it. Because of this, Angelica decided to win the tournament, so Snape couldn't uphold his end of the deal and the engagement would be cancelled. The problem is that Snape used his sponsor slot on Geeth, and she knows that she can't beat him. Angelica is stunned though when Rick offers to train her, and she begins to fear for her own life. Rick says that this training will be harsher than anything Angelica can even imagine, but she tells him not to hold back. Angelica is shocked though when Rick puts some weights on her. Rick just tells her to remember her strengthening magic so she doesn't end up dying, but Angelica wishes he would explain the training to her first. Rick ignores her pleas and just drags her along as he runs. Angelica freaks out as she has no idea what's going on, so Rick explains that she can get her body used to fast movement by getting pulled by someone faster. Angelica has some really good acceleration, but her problem is that she loses her stability after that. Angelica begs him to stop for a moment, but Rick declares that the key to rapid improvement is to kick it up a notch when you think you're at your limit. Rick assures her that it won't be so bad because there are only 6 more hours left of this. When it's over, Angelica can't believe that her legs are still attached to her body because she thought they fell off a long time ago. Rick went through this same exact training, and he even died 3 times on his first day. Angelica's proud to have survived, but Rick reveals that they still have afternoon training coming up after a short lunch break. Angelica begs for it to be over, but Rick seems to have selective hearing as he just says that they will meet again in an hour. After 5 more days of training, Angelica convinces herself that she didn't run away from training and she just made a tactical retreat to protect her mental health. She is confident that Rick won't find her, but she is very wrong. Rick looked for her all over the country, but Angelica is shocked because it's only been 15 minutes since she ran away. Rick surprisingly understands why she ran away because he did the same thing during his 2 years of training. He ran away dozens of times, but he also died tens of thousands of times too. One time, Elissaret even had to share her mana with Broston so he could revive Rick another 2,000 times. This meant a lot more training and dying, so Rick had to get used to it. Rick was on the verge of giving up several times, but Broston always gave him words of encouragement. He told him to compare the regret he would feel if he gave up versus his current suffering. The weight of giving up was always heavier, so Rick kept going. Angelica then describes all the things she hates about being a noble. Because of all those things, she decided to contribute to her family as someone who fights and not a noble lady. This is why she dreams of becoming the first special class woman knight. Angelica doesn't want to feel the weight of regret either, so she is once again ready to train. Angelica is better suited to using a sword, but the tournament doesn't allow weapons. Because of this, Rick thinks it would be best to teach her techniques that turn her hands into a sword. To do this, Rick has invited Rionette to join their training. A while later, it's time for the last match between the top spots of Block C. This is Angelica's fight, but she's growling like a wild beast for some reason. The audience knows that Angelica's elegant fighting style won't work against this specific opponent, but there's something different about her. The fight begins, and everyone is shocked to see her attack like a brute, and she instantly wins. Rick is pleased with the results of the training, but Angelica seems to be in some sort of trance. Afterwards, Mizette returns after following a lead about one of the other orbs. Unfortunately, it led to nothing. Mizette then tries to get fresh with the waitress, but he just gets rejected. That night, Broston explains to Mizette that they will get another orb if they win the tournament. Elissaret wants to join the tournament as well, but Rick fears that she would destroy the entire place if she did. Rick explains that he's been training Angelica, but she's disappointed because there isn't enough time for her to train more. Everyone encourages her, and they point out that even a little training will help drastically. Elissaret has no clue what they're talking about, but she still tells everyone to do their best. After everyone gives their words of encouragement, Angelica's ready to give her all. The next day, the Fist King tournament begins. The first matches are announced, and we get a look at who Rick, Angelica, and Geese are fighting. Rick is just glad that he doesn't have to face Broston, because if he did, then he would just give up. Broston's opponent is some fish-looking guy, and Broston's bald friend cheers him on. Kelvin is there as well, but someone in the audience is worried about his condition. Cyclops isn't worried though, because he is sure that Kelvin will win no matter what condition he's in. The audience begins to make bets on who will win, but Angelica has noticed something. Geese was placed in the bracket in a spot where he won't have to face Broston or Kelvin until the final. The match fixing has already begun because Geese will be able to avoid tough opponents. It's clear to Angelica that they're going to make Geese look super strong to the crowd, and when the odds against him are high, Snape will bet on his opponent. Geese will then throw the match and lose, so Snape can obtain a grand fortune. Angelica will meet him in the second round though, so she is determined to ruin their plan. A little later, Kelvin says that he's happy to see Broston and Rick at the tournament. Broston reminds him that they're there for the belt, and they all look forward to facing each other. Cyclops points out that Kelvin has the look of a challenger now, and he's glad because it reminds him of how Kelvin looked a long time ago. He's talking about when he first brought Kelvin to his gym, and Cyclops boasted about having a fighter from his gym reach top 4 in the tournament. Kelvin was allowed to fight this guy, and he wondered if he was also allowed to end his life. That's of course against the rules, just like using a weapon, but those are the only rules. Kelvin confidently told the guy not to get upset after losing, but Kelvin ended up being the one on the ground. Kelvin lost, but his extremely high potential was obvious, even though he had never been trained before. Kelvin changed after his first defeat as he trained harder so he could grasp victory. He began looking forward to losing to even stronger opponents because he would then just train even more. This was the life Kelvin always wanted, and his endless training led to him shocking the world. Kelvin ended up decimating the champion in his first tournament. It's been 6 years since then, but Cyclops is glad to see Kelvin's spirit burning once again. Soon the first match of the tournament begins, but Geese's opponent isn't able to do anything to him. The opponent demands that he take the fight seriously, but Geese just shocks everyone with the amount of power he can generate with a single swing. The opponent doesn't give up and launches a barrage of attacks at an insane speed, but Geese just becomes more annoyed. Geese attacks again, but he unintentionally hits the guy and knocks him out cold. He is announced the winner, and everyone wonders if there has ever been a sponsor fighter this strong. It's clear that he's very strong, but Rick thinks something is strange. Even with all of Geese's power and toughness, his movements are of a complete amateur. Unfortunately, Geese still won easily, and he left quite the impression on the crowd. The tournament continues, and our heroes win all their fights. The last match of the first round is Kelvin's, and our heroes are eager to finally see what he can do. Kelvin attacks with incredible speed, and Rick says that it's like he knew exactly what his opponent was going to do. Brosnan explains just how crazy Kelvin really is, as he's able to sense changes in electrical signals and adrenaline, among other things, just by smelling them. They agree that he's an incredible fighter, but the crowd is shocked as Kelvin gets knocked to the ground. Rick is then the one to be shocked, as the others explain that Kelvin let himself get hit. The crowd cheers for Kelvin, so he gets up and quickly knocks out his opponent. Kelvin is announced the winner, but his friends think he plays around too much. The second round begins the next day, and Snape arrives to take a seat next to Rick. Snape introduces himself to the others, but Elissaret wonders why the lizard is putting on a nice guy act. Rick wonders why he isn't sitting in the VIP seats, so Snape explains that this next fight is incredibly important. It's a fight between his brother and his fiancée, so he needs to see it up close. In the halls, Geese thinks about how he drank too much the night before, and he runs into Angelica. Geese has to be reminded about who she is, and he explains that Snape told him not to damage her face so she can look good at their wedding. Angelica's eager to show him the results of her hard work, but Geese mocks her and says that no amount of training could make up for the gap in their power. Angelica is sure that he has trained hard as well because of his physique, but Geese says that he doesn't do any training. He just lives his normal life, and his body ended up this way. Geese calls himself a natural born talent, and he recommends that Angelica just stand still during their fight. That way he can make sure that he doesn't punch her stomach, so she can still bear Snape's children. This of course infuriates Angelica, so she vows to destroy him. Their match begins as the crowd goes crazy, but Angelica is stunned when her first attack does nothing to Geese. She manages to dodge his attack, but once again her attack does nothing to Geese, despite landing a direct hit. Angelica knew she wouldn't be able to hurt Geese with her basic attacks, so she does something that surprises Snape all the way up in the stands. She removed her strengthening magic, so Geese wonders what she's planning to do. Rionette cheers her on, and Angelica uses Mana Reflex Inversion. Geese tells her to just give up, but she uses her new Thread Slicer attack, and she manages to cut Geese. Everyone cheers her on, and Angelica wonders who Geese was calling a small fry. Snape is stunned because not even the sharpest sword could scratch Geeth's skin. Rick and Rionette know better though, because this is what they taught Angelica. A look back shows when Rionette demonstrated the technique to Angelica. It's called Thread Slash, but Angelica thought that Rick was a psycho for wanting her to learn it. Rionette explained that it's not impossible since Rick was able to learn it. Rick could never manage to be as precise as Rionette, so Rionette explained that Angelica just needs to feel the wind when she swings her arm. Angelica had a hard time grasping it, but she practiced more than she ever had. She eventually learned to incorporate her other abilities and reimagined the technique in her own style. It's a technique that releases magical energy stored within the body in a short and powerful burst. It takes a huge toll on the body, but the hellish training they put her through makes it seem like nothing to her. Angelica's Flicker Feet ability allows her to use the technique in a way that only she is capable of. Geeth gets annoyed when she uses it again, and he nearly chops her in half. Snape is entertained as the two continue to battle it out, but Geeth is done holding back. He sends Angelica flying into a wall and tells Snape that he can't resist doing whatever he wants to such a lively opponent. Angelica refuses to give up, but Geeth has seen her flicker ability a bunch of times already, and he can now match her speed. He really hits her hard this time, and he mocks her for being mediocre trash. Rick becomes concerned for Angelica, but Snape is glad that he's finally realizing that Geeth's strength is unmeasurable. Snape first met his adopted brother when Geeth was 8 years old, and he would beat Snape so badly that he couldn't even stand. It turns out that Geeth is the person that made Snape retire from fighting. Geeth is a perfect prodigy, born with every talent needed for combat. He is a true monster. Geeth is also a real jerk because he continues to taunt Angelica. He says that she is worthless trash and that will never change no matter how much training she does. He also piles on by insulting her parents. Snape knows that Angelica thinks he's trying to rig the match and have Geeth lose, but Geeth's crazy strong and there's no need for that. Instead, Snape has done the opposite. The odds of a sponsor slot competitor winning are extremely low. Everyone bet against Geeth, so Snape took those odds and he placed a large bet on Geeth to win. The crowd then watches in horror as Geeth begins to really beat up Angelica. It's a cruel beatdown, and Rick determines that Angelica has reached her limit. Angelica is confident that Geeth won't be able to beat her, but Geeth is determined to see her break. He wants to make her realize that a piece of trash will never be able to train enough to beat a prodigy like him. Angelica doesn't want to regret anything like she talked to Rick about, and she tries one last punch. This doesn't work out too well though, as it just makes Geeth want to eliminate her even more. Rick tries to have the match stopped, but it's too late as Geeth begins his final attack. Luckily for Angelica, something makes Geeth miss. Her life is spared, but Geeth is announced the winner. Geeth sees that Rick was the one that tossed his shoe, but Rick is obviously furious. Angelica is taken away, and Rick meets with Geeth in a hallway. Geeth is pretty upset about the interference, but he's surprised when Rick avoids his attack. Rick calmly explains that there's no need to hurry because he wants to defeat Geeth in front of the entire crowd. Geeth is furious, but he feels the same way. Rick goes on to win his next match, but Angelica's still in bad shape. Rick thinks about how hard she trained, and he can't help but sympathize with her. Broston defeats his opponent with just one strike like Rick did, and Kelvin shows off his immense power as well. This only leaves 4 competitors, and the semifinals will take place the next day. Rick finishes up some training and finds that Angelica has recovered. He assumes that Broston healed her, but he warns that any damage deep in the body will still remain. Something is very obviously bothering her, but Rick doesn't even notice, so she explains what's wrong. Rick trained her even though there was nothing in it for him, but she ended up failing. She apologizes for wasting his time and explains that she just wanted to prove that she could walk on her own 2 feet. Angelica convinces herself that marrying Snape won't be so bad, but Rick snaps her out of it. He says that he is the one that should be apologizing because he wasn't able to discern Geeth's true strength before it was too late. Rick simply tells her to watch his next match closely so she can see what lies beyond the training she went through. The semifinals finally begin, and Rick is set to face Geeth. Rick is surprised to hear that Geeth wants to apologize to Angelica, but it turns out that he's only sorry that he didn't end her life. Now she has to endure living while being tormented by her lack of ability. The fight begins, so Geeth starts taunting Rick, but Rick ends up crushing his face in. Rick has brought the prodigy to his knees, so he tells Geeth to stop looking so pathetic. Geeth thinks he's just getting too confident, but Rick rocks him again. Angelica's shocked to see Rick's attacks working on Geeth's iron body, but Rick has hardly used his strength at all. Rick is only using controlled attacks. The force of the blow doesn't land on the outside of the body, it bores its way inside. It doesn't matter how strong Geeth's body is, if Rick attacks with perfect timing, he will do major damage. Rick gives Geeth a chance to quit, but Geeth uses strengthening magic instead. It's specifically for dragons, and it makes the match much more intense. It uses up a lot of magical energy, but that's no problem for Geeth. Snape explains that Geeth has never trained his magical capacity at all, he was just born with a ton of it. Rick is practically the opposite, so Geeth tells him to blame his parents. Rick's next attack gets stopped by Geeth's iron body, and Angelica's shocked to see that the lizard was able to learn the technique she was using. The crowd has gone quiet, so Geeth assumes that everyone has gotten bored of watching a prodigy beat up an average person. Broston, however, sees it differently. He explains that Rick doesn't care about the audience, he only cares about how Angelica sees him. Rick blocks another attack, and he's pleased to see that Geeth is finally showing some signs of fatigue. Geeth is shocked because no matter how much he attacks, Rick never sheds a drop of blood. This is because Rick is using a special technique. It allows him to disperse attacks within his body, so he has hardly taken any damage at all. Geith is insulted because Rick is clearly holding back. Rick explains that he restricted his physical abilities to match Angelica's levels because winning this match isn't the only important thing. He also wants to show Angelica her own potential. Rick has turned this bout into sort of a virtual rematch between Geith and Angelica. This of course infuriates Geith, but Rick tells him to calm down and think about his next attack. Geith irons up his body for his next attack, but Rick just shatters his armor to pieces. Rick explains that Geith has never tried hard enough at anything, so getting this tired is new to him. Snape refuses to believe that Rick surpasses Geith in power, but Rick's team points out that Rick hardly has any ability at all. Rick started training after the time for training his magic reserves had passed, so technically, he is less than average. Snape can't understand how he is able to surpass a prodigy like Geith, but Angelica has come to realize why. Rick tells Geith that he isn't used to being tired, so he is no longer able to retain his precision when attacking. Those who work hard continue to push themselves even through fatigue. They keep moving until they can't anymore. The strength a person has after they've exhausted themselves is that person's true strength. The brain-dead lizard tries to keep attacking, but it's no use. Rick says that true prodigies hone their skills by putting in a lot of effort, and he has seen this happen with his friends. Geith has always thought he was the strongest person alive, but in reality, he was only running into opponents he could beat. Geith really loses it after hearing this, so he uses the greatest of Dragonoid strengthening magics. This practically turns him into a dragon, and Snape reveals that Geith has called on the ancient blood of the dragons. Rick is caught off guard by his power, and he is shocked when his next punch does nothing to the beast. It's like Geith is made of metal, and his attacks are a lot faster. Geith really lucked out being born with this powerful body, so Rick determines that he won't be able to win. Geith is glad that Rick has come to his senses, but what Rick actually meant was that someone at Angelica's current level can't beat a dragon. This doesn't mean that Angelica should give up, because she just needs to keep training for the next time she needs to put her life on the line. Rick then starts adding a few months of training here and there, slowly increasing his own power. He releases 12 months worth of training, and he becomes too fast to see. Angelica concedes that she isn't at this level yet, but she can see that Rick is using her flickering feet technique in a really advanced way. This makes her realize that this will be her strength if she continues the hellish training for another year. Rick has taken control of the fight, so he does some more lecturing. He explains that ordinary hard work can't overcome the difference in inborn abilities. It requires the madness to continue to exert extraordinary efforts. It's true that Angelica lost after training herself to death for an entire month. So he questions if she will be able to push herself to do that same hellish training for an entire year if it means she can win. Angelica reminds herself about what Rick said about the regret scale. She is inspired and declares that she was born with a scale that only ever tips in one direction. Rick knocks Geith on his behind, and he wonders if the lizard has what it takes to push himself through this current struggle. Unfortunately, Geith hasn't learned a single thing, so Rick decides that he will just have to end the fight. Rick uses the thread slash, but he isn't as precise as Angelica. The attack still manages to defeat Geith, but Rick tells him that he is lucky that he isn't facing the Angelica that will exist in a year. Angelica is confident that she can reach the level Rick showed her in 1 year, and Rick is declared the winner of his match. Snape is surprisingly calm, and it's because he's actually happy to see Geith get denied. Geith destroyed his life as a pugilist, so Snape doesn't feel bad for him at all. Snape has lost a lot of money after betting on Geith, and he won't be able to marry Angelica now. Angelica mocks him for it, but she is surprised when he nobly accepts defeat. It's finally time for the second match of the tournament that'll have Broston face Kelvin. Kelvin's a 3-time champion, but Broston beat every opponent he fought with just one punch. Kelvin can instantly tell how much of a beast Broston is because he's just standing there, but he still doesn't leave a single opening. The fight begins, so Kelvin starts with a barrage of punches, but the crowd gasps in amazement as Broston pushes him back. Kelvin becomes excited because Brosnan is the strongest person he has ever faced, but everyone is horrified when Geith returns to the arena. His dragon blood has made him go crazy, so he goes on a rampage in the stands. The terrifying lizard goes to attack Kelvin, but Kelvin easily stops him and sends him flying. Geith's strength is at the level of an A rank, but Kelvin destroyed him so easily. This makes our group wonder if he has stepped into the realm of S rank. Kelvin is disappointed to hear that his match is being postponed to the next day, but Brosnan says that he sensed uncertainty in his attacks. Later, everyone goes to eat, and they discuss how they just need Brosnan or Rick to win, and they will get the jewel thereafter. Rick isn't there because he went on his 700-kilometer run, and Angelica isn't even surprised by his craziness anymore. Rick gets pretty far from the city, and he finds Kelvin training. Rick thinks that Kelvin should be more concerned about exhausting himself before his fight against Brosnan, but he doesn't care. Instead, Kelvin wants to spar against Rick. Rick has no choice but to spar, and he shocks Kelvin with his incredible speed. Rick is impressed to see Kelvin dodge his punch, so he wonders why he got hit one time during the tournament. Rick knows that Kelvin uses his strong sense of smell during fights, so he wonders if his nose was just stuffy. Kelvin acknowledges Rick's strength, so he decides to tell him his backstory. Kelvin grew up always looking forward to his next fight, but eventually there wasn't anything he could call a fight anymore. Things got better when he came to Heractopia, but Kelvin eventually started beating everyone there too. He was knocking people out in under 1 minute and with just one punch. Kelvin became upset because things started getting boring again, but he thought it wouldn't be so bad because at least Nick Fury was happy. The fights became meaningless, so getting stronger was the only thing Kelvin had to look forward to. One day some guy told Fury that people are starting to get bored of the tournament because Kelvin just keeps winning with one punch. This guy warned that Fury's gym would fail if people stopped caring about fighting, so he wanted Kelvin to start losing on purpose. Fury couldn't have cared less about what this guy wanted, and there was no way he would ever tell Kelvin to throw a fight. Kelvin didn't want to cause problems for the guy that's already missing an eye, so he threw a fight so everyone would think that he was beatable. From then on, Kelvin mixed some bad fighting days with good ones. He made it so the crowd would love watching the fights, and he still won 3 times in a row. Kelvin now fights so that matches are exciting, and he never fights seriously. His fights draw huge crowds to the city, and Fury's gym prospers. Rick seemingly wasn't even listening, and he just warns Kelvin not to take Brosnan lightly. The next day, the fight is set to take place, and the audience is told that defense magic has been cast over the seating area. The fight starts off the same way it did before, but this time Kelvin uses a new move. Everyone is shocked because he rotated his arm at high speed to increase the force of his blow. It was enough to knock Brosnan's hand out of the way, but Brosnan nearly eliminates Kelvin with his counterattack. Kelvin is impressed, but Brosnan can't say the same. He can tell that Kelvin isn't fighting seriously, but Kelvin wonders if Rick spilled the beans. Brosnan is just making assumptions, but Kelvin admits that he holds back for the sake of the audience. Kelvin acknowledges that Brosnan is the real deal, but he still can't fight seriously. If he does, then everyone will realize that he has been holding back and throwing fights. Kelvin is ashamed, but Brosnan commends him for putting others before himself. Brosnan is disappointed about not being able to fight Kelvin at full strength, but it can't be helped, so he prepares to use the appropriate amount of strength for the situation. He says that he will only fight with 2 fingers, and he won't move a single inch from the spot he is standing in. It would be hypocritical for Kelvin to tell him to fight seriously, so he just accepts the challenge. Brosnan tosses him around a bit with just his 2 fingers, and Kelvin realizes that he's also making the fight interesting. Everyone cheers for Kelvin, but Mizek can tell that Brosnan is doing something clever. Kelvin thinks about how much fun it would be to fight someone like Brosnan at full strength, especially because there are a lot of attacks he wants to test out. Unfortunately, Kelvin just won't let himself ruin everything. Just then, Nick Fury yells at him and reveals that he sees right through Kelvin. Fury knows that Kelvin has been holding back, but he says that it has always been his dream to train up the strongest pugilist in history. He wants Kelvin to become the strongest, but Kelvin wonders if it's really okay. The old man would like nothing more, so Kelvin decides to fight to his heart's content. Kelvin has never been more excited, and he tells Brosnan that there's no need to act anymore. Everyone is shocked as Broston stops Kelvin's all-out attack, but Kelvin points out that Broston had to use all 5 fingers to stop him. Kelvin wonders if it was an accident, but Broston explains that he's just using the appropriate amount of strength. Broston keeps blocking all of Kelvin's attacks, but Kelvin sees an opening. Kelvin just ends up getting tossed, but he irons up his body to avoid the impact. The two fighters are having a great time, but the crowd has begun to realize that Kelvin has been tricking them this entire time. There is no going back now, so Kelvin is determined to take this fight all the way. He uses level 5 nature composed magic, but Angelica points out that dog people like him are not supposed to be good with magic. This means that he must have trained himself to his limits several times. Rick is incredibly impressed, and he determines that Kelvin must be on the same level as Broston. Everyone is shocked, and Fury thinks about how he didn't even know Kelvin could use magic. Broston blocks the attack, but Kelvin closes the gap and prepares another spell. He dodges Broston's attack, and he manages to trap the big guy. Angelica expected no less from a champion, but Rick is worried about something. Kelvin prepares his next spell, but Broston's teammates don't seem to be worried. The same can't be said for the crowd though, as they are shocked when Kelvin prepares to use level 8 magic. He creates a giant ball of energy, and Rick is horrified to see how bad things are getting. Angelica has never seen Rick like this, and he just says that Kelvin is far stronger than he imagined. What's most terrifying though is that this means Broston will stop holding back. Broston breaks free from the trap and determines that Kelvin should be able to take the attack he's about to use. Kelvin's giant ball of energy is just getting bigger, but the entire crowd is shocked when Broston just uses brute strength to stop the attack. Broston acknowledges Kelvin's new will to fight, and everyone is shocked when he gives a quarter thumbs up. It's a tradition in orc battles, and it means that both fighters will abandon evasions and defense to simply exchange blows. Rick is horrified to hear this because it means that Broston will just be attacking for the rest of the fight. Kelvin feels something he has never felt before, and he wonders if this feeling is the thing called terror. Broston is so fast that Kelvin's sense of smell is useless against him, and he gets thrown back from just the shockwave of Broston's punch. Kelvin uses different types of level 7 magic, but it's no use. Broston just keeps moving forward, and he isn't even blinking. Everyone is sure that Kelvin is out of energy after using so many spells, and Broston lands a punch. Angelica thinks it was a direct hit, but Rick explains that it wasn't. Kelvin used several moves to avoid getting destroyed. His bones and organs are still messed up pretty badly, but any other person would have been dead at. Kelvin considers giving up for a moment, but he has always wished for an opponent like Broston. This is the fight he has been looking for his entire life, so he angrily tells himself to get up. Kelvin is all out of magic, but he refuses to give up, so he declares that he still has his physical strength. Kelvin unleashes a flurry of punches, but Rick knows that he won't last long after taking so much damage. Kelvin eventually collapses, and he's surprised to learn that guys as strong as Broston really do exist. Just then, everyone begins to cheer for Kelvin. Kelvin is touched to hear them cheering, even after he deceived them for so long, so he stands up once more. The audience goes crazy, and Kelvin prepares to throw one final punch. He is out of magic and strength, but he says that this is when it's time to chisel away at his own spirit for fuel. Kelvin is covered in flames as he combines several techniques, and he unleashes his attack. Everyone watches, absolutely amazed by the grand display of power, but this incredible attack does nothing to Broston. Broston commends him for the impressive attack and wonders if he has used every last drop of energy he had. Kelvin can only laugh as he realizes that he couldn't even move Broston, but he says that this fight was the most fun he has ever had in his entire life. Kelvin has earned Broston's respect, and he shows it by punching him right in the face. Old Man Fury acknowledges that Kelvin has lost, but he still considers him to be the greatest pugilist in history. Kelvin collapses as he's out for the count, but the joy this fight brought him makes him smile. Broston's friends cheer for his victory, and Rick congratulates him on defeating the champion. Angelica thinks that such an overwhelming victory against the champ is incredible, but Broston says that Kelvin was very impressive. Rick is just glad that they will for sure get the jewel now, and all he will have to do is withdraw. Broston interrupts him though, and just says that he's looking forward to their match. Rick realizes that he's in great danger, and loses a bunch of hair from the overwhelming stress. Elsewhere, Kelvin reads articles about his loss and how he had been deceiving everyone. Kelvin feels like he has become the villain, but Cyclops is sure that everything will be fine. He is more interested in Kelvin's final move because he never knew he had such a powerful attack in his arsenal. Kelvin explains that the move just came to him because he was so absorbed in the moment. Kelvin feels guilty about lying to everyone, and even worse about losing. Fury knows that he was just being considerate and reminds him that losing isn't a big deal because he can just train hard and get stronger again. Kelvin wonders why he looks after him so much, so Cyclops explains that he's like a son to him. Broston interrupts and offers to treat Kelvin's wounds. Kelvin rejects the offer though because he wants to feel pain that he hasn't felt in a while. He also realizes that Rick was right for warning him about how strong Broston is. Rick isn't doing so great though, as he has locked himself in his room. Angelica tells him to stop acting like a child, but Rick doesn't want to die again. Snape came to give some encouragement, but now he must try and convince Rick to come out of hiding. He explains that everyone's really excited to watch the final because this is the first time in a while that they will have a new champion. Snape would really like for Rick to participate, but Rick says that his life is more important than some tournament. Snape changes his strategy and dramatically explains that a lot of people are counting on him to make the tournament a success. Tons of money has been waged as well. Snape says that it can't be helped if Rick doesn't want to risk his life, and he determines that everyone else will just have to abandon their dreams. Angelica reminds him that he can just be revived, so dying shouldn't be a big deal. That's easy for her to say, but Rick says that dying is scary. Angelica reminds him that he endured years of training with Broston, so he shouldn't be scared of fighting just one match against him. Rick says that training and fighting are completely different, and Angelica just wouldn't understand. Angelica is hurt by these words, and she realizes that she has been wrong about Rick all along. Just then, Mizette wonders if Rick ever thought about how strange it was that Broston had a perfect training plan prepared on the first day he arrived. Rick thought that they were just ready to train any allies they encountered so they could defeat Kaiser Alcepiot. This wasn't the only reason, as Mizette reveals that Broston was always waiting to train up someone he could fight on equal ground. Orcs have a culture of fighting, but Broston is so strong that he has never once had an even fist fight. He has felt alone since childhood, so it's his dream to one day fight on equal ground with someone. Mizette is sure that Broston was hoping that his fight with Rick would fulfill his dream, so he wants Rick to take that into consideration. Alyssa Red also offers her 2 cents, and Rick gives it some thought. He has a memory of when he first met Broston, and he was terrified. Just from their handshake, Broston could tell that Rick didn't have any fighting experience, and he had the lowest magic capacity. Rick thought that Broston was just the same as all the people who denounced his dream, and he assumed that he would tell him to give up on becoming an adventurer. Rick was shocked because this was not the case, and Broston just told him that he would have to train hundreds of times harder than someone with talent. Rick couldn't believe that he was accepting him, and Broston just wondered if he was ready to endure that kind of training. Angelica is furious about Rick's behavior, and she wonders if Broston's training was really that terrifying. Mizette explains that it was hell on earth, and he's surprised that Rick didn't go crazy during it. How Rick managed to last for over 2 years is a complete mystery. Angelica's in disbelief because Rick has no skill, but he decided to put himself through grueling training at the age of 40. The others reveal that Rick actually has an inborn skill, but the activation requirement is tricky. Its strength can't be controlled, and it takes a huge toll on Rick's body. Because of this, Broston forbade the use of it. Back at the inn, Rick wonders if he is pathetic. Rhianette doesn't think so, but she says that she would like Rick even more if he fought for Broston's sake. The day of the final match finally arrives, and Snape is more nervous than anyone because he fears that Rick will withdraw right before the fight. Rick is waiting nearby, and he explains that he is over his fear. He has determined that all he has to do is throw everything he has learned at Broston. Rick tries to act super confident, but it's obvious that he's still terrified. In the arena, the announcer reveals the long list of rewards for the winner. Rick is still terrified, so Rhianette whispers something into his ear. Both fighters take the field, and Rick declares that he will be giving everything he has. Broston looks forward to it and instructs Rick to take everything he has taught him and send it right back to him. No one has any clue about who might win because they are both so powerful, and the match begins. Rick starts off by using the flickering feet technique, but it's way faster than Angelica has ever seen. Rick eventually stops, and Brosnan is very impressed because Rick managed to make him bleed. Snape wonders what kind of magic is being used, but Angelica reveals that they haven't used any magic at all. Their movements are way too fast for Snape to see, so the others explain that Brosnan blocked several blows, but Rick managed to hurt him using Thread Slash. The fight continues as Rick applies some pressure, but Brosnan pushes him back. Rick just barely manages to dodge a devastating attack, and he lands another Thread Slash. Angelica's amazed by this level of fighting, so she wonders what Rionette told Rick. Rionette reveals that she asked Rick to take her on the hot springs trip that the winner of the tournament gets. Angelica is horrified when she assumes that the two of them will be getting intimate, and Rionette makes it worse by not denying it. Brosnan is glad to see that Rick has come to fight, and decides that it would be rude for him to do nothing but defend. He unleashes a horrifyingly powerful punch, and it causes mass hysteria. Kelvin is in disbelief because Brosnan's one punch has more power than level 5 nature composed magic. Rick knows that he won't survive if he just runs in carelessly, and he must dodge for his life as Brosnan unleashes a barrage of punches. Rick realizes that it was just a distraction, and Angelica becomes worried about him. Rionette isn't concerned though, and we see that Rick dodged the attack. Everyone is stunned because he used the simple level 1 magic technique to block Brosnan's insanely powerful attack. What Kelvin is most impressed by is that Rick activated it without pausing to gather his magic. Brosnan compliments Rick for his precise magic control because even he can't perform magic without saying the magic's name first. Rick credits Elissaret and Mizette for teaching him, but they say that it's all because Rick trained really hard. Rick uses incredible speed to land another attack, but it doesn't do much, and Brosnan lands a counter. Everyone thinks Rick is crazy for directly attacking Brosnan from the front, and he ends up in the air where he is most vulnerable. Brosnan goes to finish the fight, but Rick amazingly uses the same level 1 magic spell to cast an air cushion beneath his feet so he can change direction. Rick follows up with a powerful air attack of his own, but Brosnan is unharmed. Angelica is in absolute awe of their power because their strength exceeds human understanding. They belong in the realm of monsters, and it's clear that this is a battle between two S ranks. Rick can't believe that his airstrike didn't do anything, and he determines that he has to use it at a closer range. Brosnan is pleased to see that his training on Rick worked out perfectly, but it was only possible because of Rick's mental and emotional strength. Rick couldn't be happier to hear these words, but they are still the words that a teacher gives to a student. Brosnan's dream is to fight someone on equal ground, so Rick determines that he hasn't done enough. Rick reveals that the others told him about Brosnan's dream, so the embarrassed Brosnan says that they exaggerated. Rick doesn't believe him though, because he saw firsthand the passion Brosnan had when training him. Rick wants to repay Brosnan for all his efforts, and he declares that he will fight him with respect as well. Brosnan realizes how fortunate he is because Rick has truly become a member of their party. He decides that this is the perfect time to talk about the past, specifically about how the Orichalcum Fist came to be. A look back all the way to 46 years ago shows when Brosnan was just 5 years old. This was when he realized that he was different from all the other orcs in his pack. Aside from his appearance, Brosnan was much more intelligent than the others. Brosnan began reading books left behind by humans, but orcs normally communicate by fighting. Unfortunately, Brosnan was too strong, so he could never relate to his kind. Brosnan decided to improve the lives of the orcs, so he taught them how to make a fire and how to communicate in other ways. Eventually, Brosnan was worshipped as a god, and there was no longer anyone who would even attempt to approach him. This included his own family, so Brosnan was all alone. One day, Brosnan returned from some scavenging to find that all the orcs lost their lives in a flood. Brosnan, however, felt nothing, which was just another painful reminder of how isolated he was. One night, Brosnan was attacked by a human, but this human was shocked to see that an orc was reading and talking. On top of that, Brosnan had eliminated a dragon that was tormenting a town. This man was hired to kill an orc in the forest, but it's clear that Brosnan is no ordinary orc. The two talked about Brosnan's situation and how isolated he has become. Brosnan wanted a friend that he could fight on equal terms, but he didn't believe that he would ever find one. The man was Reinhardt, and he had dreams as well, so he urged Brosnan to chase their dreams together. He explained that he fought alongside the hero Yamato, and he became known as one of the Legendary Five. Reinhardt was also the man that wrote the book about Yamato's legendary journey. He said that he wanted to defeat Kaiser El Seppiet, and he knew how audacious that dream was. The man thought that Broston was much closer to achieving his dream than he thought, so Broston agreed to journey with him. This was when Broston became an adventurer, and the pair founded the Orichalcum Fist. Just like Reinhardt said would happen, people with power equal to Broston's assembled. They all had their own unique skills, but what Broston longed for was a fist fight like what happens between orcs. This was when Broston came up with his training plan, but Mizet doubted that there was any person on the planet that would be able to survive it. After a while, Broston nearly gave up on his dream, but eventually Rick showed up. Back to the present, Broston is ready to fight. Rick thinks about how Broston was alongside him throughout all his training, but he never realized how much time Broston was devoting to him. Rick thinks about the skills he can use, but he doesn't feel right fighting Broston this way because Broston is looking for a straight up fist fight. He remembers being taught about the orc's quarter thumbs up, which is a sign that two fighters will abandon the thought of running away so they can solely trade blows. Everyone is then shocked when Rick shows this quarter thumbs up to Broston. Rick apologizes to Rionette because he knows that this means he won't be able to take her on the hot springs trip. Rionette is actually happy though, because Rick's selflessness is why she likes him. Broston reciprocates Rick's gesture, so the two start duking it out. The sheer force of their punches causes massive damage that can be felt throughout the entire arena. As they beat the pulp out of each other, Rick realizes that it's thanks to Broston that he's been able to chase his dream, so he has to repay him. Mizet can tell that things are going to get even more dangerous, so he asks Elisarette to lend him some magic. She does as he begins an incantation, and Mizet teleports the entire audience away to safety. Kelvin wonders why he did it, so Mizet explains that Rick and Broston's fight is going to cause an unworldly amount of damage. Everyone is outside, but they have no clue what just happened. Rick and Broston continue to go at each other, and everyone has to brace themselves. Their analysis determines that Rick has landed more punches, but Broston is several levels above him in terms of power per punch. The two warriors exchange some serious blows, but Rick takes the brunt of the damage. Rick can barely stand up, but he refuses to give up because he hasn't paid Broston back yet. The battle continues as they bash each other's faces in, and Broston laughs for the first time in this anime. Eventually, Rick gets absolutely rocked as Broston sends him right through the arena walls, and Rick questions if this is as far as he can go. Rick is exhausted, so he convinces himself that the fight he put up was good enough for someone like him. Rick hopes that Broston is satisfied with the fight, but he sees that his sensei looks like he can still fight more. Rick's body can no longer move, so he can't continue fighting, but Rick is surprised when he can at least move a finger. Angelica assumes that Rick can't continue, but the others reveal that Rick is not done yet. That isn't all, as they explain that Rick hasn't even gotten really serious yet. Rick determines that he isn't good enough to be called Broston's equal, especially since this was just a simple fistfight for him. However, Rick can't let himself rest, as this fight hasn't been nearly enough to repay Broston for everything he has done for him. Rick unleashes an incredible amount of power, and Rionette explains that he's using his inborn skill called Reckless Soul. Power surges through Rick's body, and everyone celebrates because their goal to shock Broston is complete. It turns out that they wanted to surprise Broston by helping him achieve his dream of fighting an equal opponent. To do this, they gave Rick special training and kept it a secret from Broston. They were able to help Rick learn how to control his inborn skill and how to use it at will. The condition to activate Reckless Soul is to be ready to exceed his limits in order to battle someone far stronger than himself. What he needs to activate it is not magical power or physical strength. It's the strength of will. Incredible amounts of power continues to surge from his body, and Rionette declares that the real fight begins now. The powered up Rick battles it out once again, and everyone watching becomes worried. Broston's amazed by everyone's surprise, and he realizes that while he was super focused on his goal, he didn't notice how much everyone cares about him. Broston finally acknowledges that he has friends now, and he hasn't been alone for a long time. The two warriors continue their battle, and Broston finally experiences what it's like to be pushed to exhaustion. The others can tell that they have both surpassed their limits, and the next hit will decide everything. The two guys charge at each other and they both land their final punch. No one can tell who won, and they find that both of them are still standing up somehow. Rick can barely speak, but he acknowledges how incredible Broston is. He explains that even after everything he has done, he still wasn't able to beat Broston. Rick collapses, but Broston has no clue what Rick is talking about. He explains that they only got to this point because Rick chose to humor Broston's dream and gave him a fist fight. Broston declares that victory belongs to Rick, and he collapses as well. Afterwards, Rick wakes up after sleeping for 3 whole days. Rick can't understand why he was given the championship belt, so Broston explains that it's because Rick won the war. Rick is grateful, but he knows that he wouldn't have been able to defeat Broston if he used his heal ability on himself over and over again. Broston doesn't want him to be down on himself, so he tells Rick that he's incredibly strong. He acknowledges the others as well and thanks them for being his friends. The group finally has the second of the 6 jewels, so they are one step closer to Yamato and Kaiser Alsepiet. They also have a fake replacement jewel to put in the belt. Just then, Rick wonders how old Reinhardt is because he fought alongside Yamato, but that was over 200 years ago. Reinhardt's exact age is unknown, but his inborn skill is what has extended his life. He has been gone for a while, but it's only because the deadline for his book was closing in and he's on the run. That night, Snape explains that Rick and Broston both declined the victory. The tournament can't be left without a winner, so Kelvin is now champion again. Kelvin can't accept this decision, so Snape asks him to at least watch over the belt. Our group prepares to go home, but everyone scolds Rick for trying to bring back too much food. Broston thinks about Reinhardt and hopes that he can tell him that his dream has finally come true. Angelica says goodbye as well, but Rick is shocked to hear that she will be back because Broston promised to train her. Rick can't believe that she's willing to sacrifice her life, but Angelica's determined to catch up to Rick and even surpass him. Rick says that he plans to run home because he's a late starting E-rank adventurer, but Angelica points out that he's pretty much an S-rank. She assumes that Rick will be running his typical 500 kilometers, but she is shocked when Rick says that their house is actually 2,800 kilometers away. Angelica fears that their food will rot in the carriage during the long trip, but Mazette uses enhancement magic to buff up their horse. Rick is ready to go, but Rionette first wants to know when they will be going on their hot springs trip. Broston reminds him that he did actually win the tournament, and Rick imagines what the trip would be like. Rick says that he didn't actually win though, and Mazette agrees that it was a draw. Mazette recommends that they have a race back home, and if Rick loses, then he will have to go on the hot springs trip. On top of that, he will have to do 100 times the training. The race begins, but Rick stays behind to promise Rionette that he will take her to the hot springs one day. He doesn't want to have to do 100 times the training though, so he begins running. As they run back, Rick thinks about how even though it took a really long time, his dream of becoming an adventurer finally came true. This isn't the end, however, as his next dream still awaits him, and it doesn't matter how old he is. Thanks for watching my recap. Subscribe to the channel for more videos.